Naomi Caldwell sat in the quiet of her glass-walled office, the New York skyline glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The hum of success usually gave her peace, but tonight that silence felt sharp, heavy. In her hands, she held a letter that shattered everything she thought she had built. It wasn't the first complaint she'd ever received. Being the CEO of a luxury automotive empire meant navigating occasional friction. But this was different. It was personal. The envelope had arrived in a plain white sleeve. No legal letterhead, no dramatic subject line, just quiet pain folded into words. Dear Ms. Caldwell, I walked into your dealership last week hoping to make the kind of purchase that would mark a milestone in my life. But what I found was something I thought your brand stood against. I was ignored, dismissed, steered toward lower-tier models I never asked about. And while I waited, I watched three white customers walk in and get offered espresso and access to the showroom's most exclusive line. Naomi's eyes had frozen on that last part. I didn't walk in asking for a discount. I didn't ask to be treated special. I asked to be treated equally. I thought Caldwell Motors was better than this. The letter was signed simply L. Simmons. She placed it down carefully on the polished wood desk. It felt like a gut punch she hadn't seen coming. And yet, somewhere in the back of her mind, she had known. The numbers were strong, sales were high. The marketing team kept reminding her how diverse their customer base looked on paper. But paper was easy. Paper lied. She stood and walked to the tall shelf on the far wall, fingers brushing across the framed photo of her younger self. The first showroom she'd ever opened, standing beside the single used vehicle she could afford to feature. She had built Caldwell Motors brick by brick, not as a brand, but as a promise. A promise that luxury didn't need to come wrapped in exclusion. A promise that someone like her, a black woman in an industry built by men who never looked like her, could make space for others. And now that promise had cracked. She picked up her phone and dialed a familiar number. It rang twice before her assistant Daniel answered. Naomi? Clear my schedule for the next 3 days, she said, and book me a flight. Quietly. There was a pause. Daniel never asked unnecessary questions, but even he couldn't ignore the sharp shift in her tone. Where to? Los Angeles, Beverly Hills showroom. Another pause. Then, got it. Naomi ended the call, standing still for a long moment before pulling open a drawer in her desk. From it, she retrieved an old ID badge. It was from before the days of corporate jets and investor meetings, back when she was just another name on a showroom floor. She studied it, the faded clip, the worn corners. Then she slipped it into her purse. This wouldn't be a press moment. This wasn't a branding opportunity. She didn't want recognition. She wanted truth. She wanted to walk through the same glass doors that had shut someone else out and see exactly what had gone wrong. The next morning, Naomi boarded a commercial flight. No press, no entourage, just jeans, sneakers, and a simple crossbody bag. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, nothing to signal wealth. She blended into the world like she had years ago, back when no one knew who she was. As the plane rose over the skyline, Naomi stared out the window. She wasn't just traveling across the country. She was stepping back into the front line. The place where respect had to be earned, not assumed. The place where injustice didn't hide in headlines. It hid in micro glances, silent dismissals, and unspoken assumptions. She had no idea yet what she would find. But whatever it was, she was ready. This time, she wasn't walking in as the CEO. She was walking in as the woman this industry had tried to overlook, and they had no idea what was coming. Naomi stepped out of the rideshare and into the clean California sun. Beverly Hills shimmered like it always did. Polished storefronts, curated sidewalks, valet-only everything. It was the kind of place that lived in magazine spreads and influencer feeds. But today, Naomi wasn't here for the scenery. She adjusted the strap of her crossbody bag, tugged the sleeves of her beige cardigan down over her wrists, and started walking. Her hair was tied back simply, no makeup, no statement purse, no assistant trailing her, no security nearby. She didn't look like the woman whose name was printed in gold letters above the showroom's glass entrance. Today, she didn't want anyone to see Naomi Caldwell, the CEO. She wanted them to see a black woman alone, walking into a space that claimed to welcome all, and watch how the room responded. The glass doors hissed as she pushed them open. Inside, the air was cooled to perfection, scented with polished leather and something faintly citrus. Her heels clicked softly on the marble floor. Cars worth more than the average home gleamed under showroom lighting, parked like sculptures. Every curve, every shine, she knew them all intimately. She had designed half of them. No one looked up. A receptionist at the desk glanced briefly in her direction, then returned to tapping at her tablet. A few salespeople stood nearby, chatting in low voices, well-dressed and practiced. Their eyes slid past Naomi like she didn't register. She paused near one of the sedans, a sleek, obsidian model that had taken 3 years to perfect. Her fingertips brushed the hood lightly. Still nothing. She moved closer to the display area, toward the luxury line she had spent years building. The section was marked subtly by velvet ropes and muted lighting. Not an actual boundary, but a suggestion. A suggestion Naomi fully intended to test. She was 2 steps past the rope when a voice finally spoke up. "Excuse me, ma'am." A man approached, late 40s, sharply tailored navy suit, shoes that clicked too loudly on the floor. Richard Langford. She recognized him immediately. Regional sales director, top performing manager. Corporate loved him. He didn't smile. "That section is reserved for private viewings," he said smoothly, motioning to the cars behind her. "We usually work by appointment." Naomi nodded politely. "I understand. I was hoping to just take a look." Richard's eyes scanned her. Her sneakers, her bag, her lack of visible wealth. She saw the math happening in real time behind his eyes. She saw the decision. "Well, our midline model are just over there," he said, gesturing casually toward the opposite side of the showroom. "They're a bit more accessible." Naomi said nothing. She let the moment hang. She turned slowly and walked where he pointed, past the curated luxury zone, away from the spotlight cars. A younger salesman passed her without a glance. Another smiled at a man in designer loafers who had just walked in behind her. Naomi stood near a display of compact sedans and waited. No one came. This was the same showroom that had sent her sales figures padded with praise last quarter. The same team that boasted about high conversion rates and luxury appointments. On paper, everything looked exceptional. And yet, in less than 5 minutes, she had been sized up, redirected, and rendered invisible. She took a slow breath. This is why she had come. She wandered the showroom for another 15 minutes, watched as a white couple was offered bottled water and a catalog within 60 seconds of stepping inside, watched as a teenager in designer athleisure got more attention than she had, watched as another black woman entered and was politely, but clearly, steered toward the financing office before she had even picked a car. Naomi felt the weight settle in her chest. It wasn't just individual bias. This was culture. This was practice. She turned back to glance toward the luxury zone. Richard stood near the velvet rope again, chatting with a sharply dressed customer, laughing easily. He didn't glance at her. That was fine. She didn't need him to see her, because she had seen enough. And now the real work would begin. Naomi sat still, almost statue-like, in the far corner of the showroom. From where she was tucked, next to a potted plant and beneath a mounted display screen, she could see nearly the entire floor without being noticed. No one had offered her a chair. She had simply found one. And now she waited, observed, measured. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall glass windows, bouncing off the polished hoods of million-dollar machines. The lighting in here was designed to make everything sparkle, except the truth. That remained hidden, glossed over by polite smiles and professional indifference. Naomi had a small notepad resting discreetly in her lap. Every few minutes her pen moved, not with numbers, not with legal details, just moments, snapshots, repetitions. At 12:17 p.m., a white man in a fitted linen suit stepped in. Instantly, a salesman swooped toward him, offering him water, then champagne. Within seconds, they were laughing about golf and arranging a test drive of the new Grand Lux model. Naomi wrote one word: immediate. At 12:43 p.m., a Latino couple entered. Both were dressed sharp, business casual, confident. They paused near the luxury display, clearly interested. No one approached. After 5 minutes, they were offered a brochure by a junior staffer and directed toward the financing office. Redirected, she wrote. At 1:12 p.m., a black man, tall, well-groomed, maybe early 30s, walked in alone. Naomi watched as his eyes scanned the showroom. He lingered near the limited edition coupe, visibly impressed. Naomi waited. So did he. 10 minutes passed, not a single staff member engaged. He eventually turned and left, ignored. By 2 p.m., Naomi had logged 11 customers. The pattern was no longer subtle, it was deliberate. The sales team was trained to be welcoming. That was in every corporate handbook she had written herself. But what she was witnessing wasn't about training. It was about instinct. It was about culture. Some people were seen, others were not. She leaned back slightly and rubbed a hand over her jaw, disguising her growing frustration as thoughtfulness. Then something new happened. A young woman approached the reception desk. A black woman, maybe in her late 50s, dressed in a crisp navy blouse and slacks. She carried herself with ease, but Naomi recognized the quiet tension in her shoulders, the kind worn by people who are used to being overlooked but still show up anyway. Naomi watched as she was greeted by a junior staffer. The young woman, auburn ponytail, beige blazer, name tag reading Maria, smiled hesitantly. It was different from the trained, polished grins Naomi had seen all day. This smile felt unsure. The customer asked something, gesturing toward one of the newer luxury sedans near the front. Maria glanced toward the display. Naomi saw the conflict flicker across her face. Then instinctively, Maria looked over her shoulder to Richard Langford. Richard, who was standing halfway across the floor, caught the glance. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. A single tilt of his head was all it took. Subtle, controlled. Maria froze. Naomi saw her swallow hard. The customer was still talking, hopeful. Maria nodded politely, then gently redirected her toward the mid-tier section, offering to show her something a bit more manageable. The woman smiled, a bit confused, and followed. Naomi's pen didn't move this time. She simply watched Maria's shoulders fall once the customer walked away. There it was. The pattern wasn't just enforced by policies or handbooks. It was enforced by glances, head tilts, the unspoken rules. That was what made it dangerous. That was what made it systemic. But Maria, she was different. She hesitated. Hesitation wasn't defiance, not yet, but it was doubt. And doubt meant there was still a conscience in there, still a chance. Naomi wrote down one word, Maria, then she circled it twice. The showroom continued buzzing around her. Naomi sat quietly, fading back into the corner. But her mind was moving faster now. She had seen the crack, and cracks, once found, could be widened. Naomi's gaze cut toward the glass doors the moment they swung open. Another couple had just walked in, but this time something shifted in the air. The man wore a tailored navy suit, his cufflinks glinting with understated luxury. The woman beside him carried herself with quiet poise, her silk scarf billowing as she stepped inside. They were black, mid-40s, confident, and unquestionably wealthy. Naomi could tell within seconds they weren't browsing. They were here to buy. They approached the reception desk where Maria stood, tapping something into her tablet. Naomi leaned forward slightly, not enough to draw attention, but enough to hear. The couple asked about the same limited edition Luxora GT model Naomi had been told wasn't available. Their voices were calm, polite, but direct. They weren't just curious, they were ready to purchase. Maria glanced toward the back of the showroom. Naomi followed her eyes and, as expected, saw Richard Langford already watching. He didn't move at first, just observed, calculating. Then he adjusted his suit jacket and walked over, intercepting the conversation mid-sentence. "I'm so sorry," Richard said smoothly, cutting in with a false smile. "Unfortunately, that model is currently unavailable. Special order only, I'm afraid." The man frowned. "I thought I saw it displayed in the front section when we walked in." Richard kept smiling. "It's not for public viewing right now, company policy." Naomi didn't move, but her heart rate did. She knew what was coming next. The couple hesitated, clearly confused but too dignified to cause a scene. The woman smiled thinly. "All right, thank you for your time." And just like that, they turned and left. Naomi watched them walk back through the same doors, the silence they left behind louder than any protest could have been. And then, 5 minutes later, it happened. The showroom doors opened again, and in floated a white influencer couple Naomi recognized from a few auto expos. A man in loafers with no socks, all teeth and sunglasses. A woman in oversized Chanel shades holding her phone up as she walked, filming content for her followers. Richard was already in motion. "Welcome back," he beamed as if greeting royalty. "We've got something special, waiting just for you." Naomi watched as the very same Luxora GT, not available, special order only, was slowly rolled out under showroom lighting. The influencer woman gasped dramatically and squealed into her phone. Naomi's hands clenched, not in rage but in something colder. Clarity. She stood slowly. No sudden moves, just a quiet unfurling of someone who'd seen enough. Maria noticed her rising. Their eyes locked across the showroom for just a second. It was all Naomi needed. She walked toward the exit, brushing past displays and disingenuous smiles. When she reached the reception desk, Maria turned toward her instinctively. Her expression was unreadable. Naomi slipped something across the counter. A white card. Clean, simple. Maria glanced down. The name Naomi Caldwell sat dead center in crisp black ink. No titles, no flair, just the truth. "If you ever want to talk," Naomi said softly, "you know where to find me." Maria didn't speak, but her fingers closed around the card. Tightly. Naomi walked out into the afternoon sun, the Beverly Hills air warm against her skin. She didn't look back. But as she stepped into her black sedan and the door shut behind her, she whispered 3 words to herself. That was enough, because it was. The war had begun. Maria's voice trembled when she finally spoke. The line had been silent for a long time, just the soft hum of traffic from Naomi's parked car and the faint background noise of Maria hiding somewhere inside the dealership, probably crouched in the break room or some corner that didn't have cameras. "I don't know why I'm calling," Maria whispered. "Maybe I shouldn't be." Naomi stayed quiet. She knew not to fill the silence. Sometimes silence was the only way truth could step forward. Maria exhaled shakily, and then the words started pouring out. Not loud, not angry, just low and tired. The kind of tired you don't recover from in a weekend off. "They have this system," she said, voice cracking. "It's not official, not written anywhere, but it's real. We're trained subtly to read people. Clothes, accent, eye contact, skin tone." Naomi's hand tightened around the steering wheel, but she didn't speak. She let Maria continue. "They call it profiling for efficiency. They say it's to avoid time wasters. But we all know what it really means. If someone doesn't look the part, we steer them toward used inventory, offer them base models, or tell them certain cars are reserved." "And those who do look the part," Naomi asked, her voice measured, careful not to inject judgment, just focus. "They get the champagne, the full tour, exclusive test drives. There's even a list. Not names, but types. High priority, low priority." Maria was crying now, quietly, the weight of complicity dripping through the phone. "I didn't want to believe it at first," she said. "I thought maybe it was just me. But then I saw it happen again and again to the same kinds of people. And I kept watching, kept my head down because I needed the job." Naomi closed her eyes for a moment. She could see it clearly now. The pattern, the system, not broken by accident, but built that way. "I'm sorry," Maria whispered. "I saw what they did to you. I should have said something then." "You just did," Naomi said quietly. There was another silence. Then Maria asked the question like she was afraid of her own voice. "What are you going to do?" Naomi leaned back in her seat and stared out at the street. The city buzzed on like it always did, fast, forgetful, but not this time. "I'm going to burn the whole thing down," she said, calm, cold, certain. Another pause, a breath. "And Maria," Naomi added, her tone shifting just slightly, "I need to ask you something." "Okay," Maria said. Naomi's voice dropped low, intentional, like the moment before a match is struck. "Will you help me end this?" There was no immediate answer, and Naomi didn't rush her. But then, finally, Maria responded, not with fear, but with something deeper, heavier, resolved. "Yes," she said, "I will." Naomi nodded even though no one could see. "Then we begin." The line went dead, but something had come alive. The footage wasn't flashy, no dramatic music, no confrontations, just truth, quiet and brutal. Naomi watched the split-screen video on her laptop, one window showing Marcus, a white man in a sleek navy suit, smiling politely as a Caldwell Motors employee ushered him toward the Chiron Supersport with practiced enthusiasm. The other window showed Denise, a black woman in the exact same outfit, down to the brand of her handbag, standing at the same reception desk, being told to return with her husband if she wanted to discuss serious purchases. The timestamp difference? 12 minutes. The reactions? Night and day. Marcus was welcomed with espresso and light jokes. Denise was questioned, subtly, like her presence was already an inconvenience. Marcus was told the dealership prides itself on transparency and prestige. Denise was asked about her employment before being offered a brochure and shown the exit. Both had credit scores over 800. Both had million-dollar liquid balances. Both had been coached by Naomi's team to request the same vehicle. But only one was treated like a buyer. Naomi paused the video and leaned back, letting the weight of what she had just seen settle in her chest. She had known it was happening. She had felt it, even before she walked into the dealership that day. But now she had proof. Not secondhand accounts, not speculation, just as raw, undeniable evidence. She clicked the button, saving the file to an encrypted drive. Then she opened her email. To Jonathan Fields, Caldwell Motors Board, CC Executive Leadership. Subject, Beverly Hills showroom footage. Attachment, evidence dual test visit.mp4. Body, we have a problem. Naomi, she hit send. The silence in her penthouse suite was absolute. No victory music, no swelling theme. Just the steady hum of the city outside her window and the ticking of the old watch she wore on her left wrist. Her father's, the one he gave her when she opened her first plant in Detroit. It hadn't even been a full week since she'd walked into her own dealership Undercover. But in that time, the ground had already started shifting. The staff didn't know it yet. The board didn't know it yet. But a reckoning had been set in motion. She picked up her phone and called Marcus. "It's done," she said. "And Denise?" he asked. "She's with me, watching the footage. She's pissed." "Good." Naomi glanced over at the woman sitting across the room. Denise, arms crossed, eyes locked on the frozen image of herself being turned away. She wasn't angry for herself. She was angry for every person who didn't have a camera, who didn't have a CEO watching. Naomi ended the call and stood up. Tomorrow she would walk into the Beverly Hills showroom again. But not as a mystery, not as a customer, not as a test. Tomorrow she would walk in as Naomi Caldwell, the name carved into the metal above every single door in that building. And this time she wouldn't be silent. Richard Langford's phone had been ringing nonstop since 8 a.m. First, it was a terse voicemail from his regional director. Then a nervous call from someone in PR. Now, as he stood behind the glass wall of his office, arms crossed and jaw clenched, he listened in silence as corporate legal tried and failed to explain why now was the first they were hearing about a discrimination case with video evidence. "This wasn't just a customer complaint, Richard," the voice on the other end said. "It's a strategic liability, and it's spreading. We're getting calls, press inquiries. You need to contain this." "I am containing it," Richard lied, eyes already scanning the sales floor below for any sign of weakness. "I'm handling it internally." But even as the words left his mouth, he knew the illusion was slipping. Downstairs, the staff felt the shift. The usual confident rhythm of the showroom was gone, replaced with a hush that lingered in corners. Conversations cut short when Richard walked past. Employees who normally smiled on instinct now walked on edge, because they knew, or at least they suspected. And so did he. The panic had a shape now, and it wore a name: Maria Torres. She had been quieter lately, eyes always flicking toward the office. Phone locked in her pocket, but never far from her hand. Richard had noticed. And now, with whispers of hidden footage making their way back to him, he knew where to start. He caught her by the espresso bar just before her lunch break. His tone wasn't angry, not yet. "Maria, a word?" She hesitated, coffee halfway to her lips, then slowly nodded. He didn't take her to his office. Too obvious. Instead, he led her to one of the quieter VIP lounges, empty, cold, and just far enough from the cameras. He shut the door. "I'll ask this once," he said, voice tight. "Did you talk to anyone outside this dealership about our policies?" Maria's hands shook just slightly as she set her cup down. "No." Richard stepped forward. "You're sure? Because someone sent footage to corporate. Someone sent evidence, and I know you've been acting different and—" Maria didn't flinch. Not exactly, but she didn't speak either. Richard leaned in, eyes sharp. "Let me make this clear. If I find out you had anything to do with this—" He didn't finish, because the door opened, and Naomi Caldwell stepped inside, not in sneakers and plain clothes this time, in a tailored navy suit, with a folder under one arm and two people behind her, legal counsel. Richard froze mid-sentence, his face drained of color. Naomi didn't smile. "I believe this is where the interrogation ends," she said calmly. Maria blinked, relief flooding her face. Naomi handed the folder to one of her attorneys. "This is a cease and desist. You are to stop any further employee questioning related to the footage." Richard looked from Naomi to the lawyers, as if trying to understand how reality had changed so quickly. "You can't just walk in here and—" "I can," Naomi interrupted, "because this is my showroom. My name is on the deed, on the financing, on the steel frame outside this building, and you've been running it like a private kingdom." She stepped closer. "No more games. There will be an emergency board meeting in 48 hours. The footage has been shared. I've called for a full discrimination audit across every major location. And before you ask, yes, legal is involved, internal, external, federal, if it comes to that." Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Maria watched silent as the power flipped before her eyes. Naomi turned back to her. "Are you okay?" Maria nodded slowly. "Good. HR will be contacting you this afternoon. You'll be under protection during this review. If you need anything, you call me directly." She turned to go, then paused at the doorway. "Oh, and Richard?" His eyes locked on hers. "I suggest you start updating your resume." Then she walked out, and the system began to fall apart. The boardroom was silent, the kind of silence that feels like pressure, thick, still, humming with the weight of things that can't be unsaid. Naomi Caldwell stood at the head of the long mahogany table, every seat filled with the most powerful people in Caldwell Motors. Senior executives, legal counsel, PR directors, board members who, until this moment, believed they controlled the pulse of the company. Now they watched Naomi, the founder they had once underestimated, as she reached for the remote in front of her and pressed play. The large screen flickered to life. No intro, no dramatics, just the raw footage. A split-screen video, two customers, same dealership, same car request, same credit profile. On the left, a black woman, neatly dressed, clearly prepared. She asked about the high-end vehicle. The manager's tone was polite, but cold. No test drives, no brochures. "You'll need a male co-signer." The woman's face, tight with quiet humiliation, filled the room. On the right, a white man in a blazer, slightly less formal. He made the same request and was met with warmth. Champagne, an instant invitation to test drive the same car. His footage ended with him behind the wheel, smiling. No one in the room breathed. Then came the next clip, a series of audio recordings, blurred faces for anonymity. Staff whispering about screening customers, about Richard Langford's unspoken rules, about how certain customers weren't worth the effort. One voice stood out, Maria, soft, uncertain, but real. "I wanted to help her, but he shut it down. Said she didn't fit the profile. I knew it was wrong, I just didn't know who would listen." Naomi paused the tape, folded her hands, let the silence stretch. When she spoke, her voice was even. This wasn't one incident. This is culture. A culture that was allowed to grow, to fester, to define how we interact with the very people we claim to serve. A board member across the table, Jonathan Fields, gray hair, expensive watch, the kind of man who always managed to sound calm, cleared his throat. We understand your concern, Naomi, but I think it's important to remember luxury branding is built on discretion, on selective presentation. This might be unfortunate, but it's not necessarily. Jonathan, Naomi interrupted. Discretion is not a synonym for discrimination. He shifted in his seat. Another executive, this one from marketing, leaned forward. If this goes public, we're talking about brand erosion, stock drops, lawsuits. Naomi didn't flinch. If this doesn't go public, it means we let a lie live at the heart of our company. Either we fix this now or it gets fixed for us by the press, by our customers, by public outrage. She pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. Here's a list of complaints swept under the rug, all tied to the same showroom. Some date back years, all unresolved. Some of those people have lawyers. Some already reached out to the media. One of the lawyers in the room opened the folder, flipped through quickly, then paled. I am not here to negotiate, Naomi continued. I am not asking for permission to fix the company I built. You have two choices, purge the system, or I do it without you, and I do it loudly. The room fractured. Some leaned back, quiet. Others scribbled notes. One muttered something about shareholders under his breath. A woman near the end of the table, head of HR, looked down at her hands, her mouth a thin line. Naomi let it all happen. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Because the footage had done what decades of diversity training and hollow memos never could. It showed the truth. And the truth didn't ask for spin. She stood slowly, tucking the remote under her arm. I'll give you until the end of the day, she said, calm as ever. Either we rebuild this from the inside, or I burn it down in front of the world. She walked out, heels echoing like punctuation. Behind her, the reckoning had already begun. The headline hit the newswire before Richard Langford even had time to process the weight of the board's decision. Caldwell Motors fires executive over discrimination scandal. CEO promises industry reckoning. Richard stood in the center of the now silent Beverly Hills showroom, security at his back, his badge clipped off, his keys surrendered. No exit speech, no ceremony, just one final order from Naomi Caldwell, delivered with the same calm, deadly precision she had wielded in the boardroom. You no longer work here. He had built his image around control, around polish, but the truth had ripped through that facade like a blade through silk. The moment the footage surfaced, the emails, the whispers from staff, the illusion crumbled. Now he was just another name in a press release, another relic of a system that no longer had a place in the world Naomi was rebuilding. While Richard packed his things under watchful eyes, Naomi got to work. Her first move wasn't PR, it wasn't even a statement. It was a phone call, then another, and another. By the end of the week, Naomi had personally spoken to over 50 former customers, mostly Black, brown, and Asian professionals, who had submitted complaints over the years. Some had been dismissed with empty apologies. Others had never received a response at all. Their words were raw. Some cried, some raged. Most simply said, I didn't think anyone would care. But Naomi did. She cared enough to ask them a single question. Would you be willing to share your story? Nearly all of them said yes. Caldwell Motors' press conference wasn't held in a hotel ballroom or on a high-end stage. Naomi insisted it happen on the dealership floor. That dealership, the same space where so many had been dismissed, where assumptions had been made, where smiles were rationed by skin tone and sales strategies were written in bias. The room was filled with reporters, cameras, employees from every branch flown in to witness it. Naomi didn't take center stage. She stood off to the side. The spotlight belonged to the people whose voices had once been ignored. One by one, they stepped forward. A neurosurgeon in his 40s who had been asked if he could really afford a six-figure car. A fashion designer who'd been told the luxury model wasn't for everyone. A teacher who'd walked in with her husband and watched as the salesperson spoke only to him. Their stories weren't explosive. They didn't need to be. They were devastating in their ordinariness. By the time the last speaker finished, the hashtag #WeBuy2 had gone viral. The reaction was instant. Caldwell Motors was trending, not for scandal, but for accountability. But Naomi knew statements weren't enough. Change required structure. She issued the first mandate that afternoon: mandatory recurring diversity and inclusion training for every employee, from front desk receptionist to executive suite. Sales tactics would be overhauled too. No more commission bonuses for high-pressure tactics. From now on, customer satisfaction was the only metric that mattered. She created a new department: customer justice and equity, independent, transparent, empowered to investigate claims without interference. At its head, Maria Torres, the same employee who had once hesitated under Richard's shadow, now stood as one of the most powerful voices in the company. Naomi personally introduced her to the press. She saw something wrong. She spoke up. And because of that, we're all better. Other companies began calling. CEOs, dealership chains, even luxury fashion brands, asking how they could follow suit. Naomi shared everything. No NDAs, no guarded systems. "This doesn't belong to us," she said. "This belongs to the future." By the end of the month, sales hadn't dropped. They'd skyrocketed. Customers weren't avoiding the scandal. They were rewarding the integrity. One customer tweeted, "Finally bought the car I always wanted, not just because I could, but because I felt like I belonged." The dealership that had once been a symbol of subtle exclusion was now a blueprint for radical inclusion. Richard Langford watched it all unfold from the sidelines. Every headline, every share, every apology that wasn't his to give. And Naomi? She didn't celebrate. Not yet. She stood in the same showroom where she had once been ignored, now surrounded by a diverse team of employees and customers who finally felt seen. This was just the beginning. The system hadn't just been challenged, it had been dismantled. Naomi Caldwell sat in her office, the mid-morning light pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting golden ribbons across her desk. The city moved as it always did, fast, distracted, unforgiving. But this moment was still, almost sacred. Her inbox had been full since 6 a.m., invitations to panels, boardroom summaries, internal updates. But one envelope stood out, handwritten, crinkled around the edges. The kind of letter no assistant would dare throw into a pile or scan into a folder. Naomi slid it open with care, unfolding the paper inside. The handwriting was uneven, the loops large and hopeful. There were smudges, a tiny drawing in the corner of a girl standing beside a car, a speech bubble that simply read, "Thank you." She read it once, then again. "Dear Miss Caldwell, my name is Aria and I'm 9. I went to one of your dealerships with my dad. We didn't have an appointment and I was scared because sometimes people don't smile at us. But when we walked in, the man at the door gave me a hot chocolate and the lady showed my dad the biggest car on the lot. She said, 'You deserve to be here.' My dad smiled like I've never seen before. I want to be just like you when I grow up. Thank you for making a place where girls like me are allowed. Love, Aria." Naomi's hands stilled, her breath caught. It wasn't the grand speeches or media wins that got to her. It was this, a child's simple truth, unfiltered, unaware of the decades it took to make those 8 sentences possible. She leaned back slowly, letting the words sink in. Her eyes drifted to the glass wall behind her, overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, a little girl had walked into a place that used to make people like her feel small. And instead, she had felt seen. That was the win, not the headlines, not the awards. This, the showroom Aria had visited, had once been one of the worst. Naomi remembered standing there undercover, being dismissed without a glance. She remembered how the manager, Richard Langford, had brushed her off, how the champagne had flowed for others while her presence had been treated like background noise. That same showroom now had a different rhythm, a different soul. Gone were the days of coded language and gatekeeping tactics. Now, customers were welcomed with warmth. Regardless of skin tone, regardless of how expensive their shoes looked, Naomi had replaced decor with dignity, sales scripts with sincerity. The pressure was gone, and in its place, trust. She stood and walked to the bookshelf near the far wall, where a row of framed photos stood like sentinels of her journey. There was the press conference, the handshake with Maria Torres, a snapshot of her hugging an elderly couple who had once been told to look elsewhere. Naomi added Aria's letter to the top shelf, propping it between a photograph of her first factory and a plaque that read, "Built Different." She smiled, not the polished CEO smile, the real one, the kind that comes from fire and freedom. Her phone buzzed, a text from Maria. Just wrapped another equity training in Miami. One of the guys cried, "We're making waves, boss." Naomi replied with a single emoji. She turned back to her desk, feeling the pulse of something larger than her. This wasn't just a company anymore. It was a movement. She still had battles ahead. Change was slow. There were other showrooms, other cities, other leaders clinging to the way things had always been, but she had proof now. Aria was proof. That culture could be rewritten. That luxury didn't have to come at the cost of exclusion. Naomi picked up the framed letter one more time and whispered to the girl she hadn't met but already knew so well, "You already are like me." And just like that, the fight for tomorrow didn't feel quite so heavy, because today she won. Naomi didn't just change a showroom, she challenged an entire industry. And if her story moved you, it's because deep down, we all want to believe that courage can win, that truth can be louder than silence. If you believe in stories that expose injustice, celebrate redemption, and remind us what leadership should look like, subscribe. Because this isn't the last time the system gets challenged, and we'll be right here when it does.